Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am absolutely thrilled to have Dr. Melanie McNally with us today. She's a licensed clinical psychologist. I was just telling her, yay, for getting her doctorate, who helps Gen Zers become the superheroes of their life stories. I love that. She provides online support through teletherapy and coaching, online programs and books that teach Gen Zers how to build self-confidence, manage anxiety, and achieve their goals. She's also founded Therapy Bootcamp, an app-based psychoeducational service for Gen Zers to get therapy tools delivered right to their phones. Therapy Bootcamp is an 8-week program where boot campers build self-awareness and develop coping tools and they can use, all while being able to DM Dr. McNally directly. And the next one starts April 4th, in case you are interested. She has worked in the mental health field since 2005 and teaches the skills, strategies, and tools that she herself has used and continues to use. She lives in the forest of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan with her husband and 3 dogs. I love this so much. Welcome, Melanie, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I need to call you Dr. McNally.
No, you can call me Melanie.
Okay, but you've earned the title. I think that's so fantastic. Thank you for joining me. Today's conversation is one, I just told Melanie that I'm moving her up in the podcast release date because this is such a pertinent topic. As research right now is showing 53% of teen girls are having suicidal ideation and 4% of teen boys, which I thought was really a dramatic difference. Let's jump in and we're going to be talking about anxiety in teens and how to handle it, what to do with it. So let's jump into the deep end here. So what do you think about those statistics?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm not surprised. I'm sure, you saw with even at the end of 2021, when the Surgeon General released that big report and talked about the mental health crisis that we're in for youth right now, that the anxiety and depression among youth has doubled since the pandemic started. I know for anxiety, one of the things that the pandemic has really brought out, and this might be related to girls, I don't know, this is just kind of a theory, but there's such a huge shift in social relationships during the pandemic. And girls, especially teen girls, are so much more relational. The relationships are a huge part of teen girl identity. And, in boys, it's a little different. They identify a little bit differently as they go through high school and middle school. But for girls, I could see that big shift in relationships being something that's really hard to process and really hard to manage. I've had so many teen girls where their friend groups completely shifted and changed during the pandemic through no fault of their own. At first, everyone was great about staying in touch, and then people kind of got bored of texting and FaceTiming, and they all started to kind of move apart from each other. And then maybe they started to develop some other friendships, and those friendships shifted and changed. And a lot of girls are left kind of either feeling like they don't have a friend group at all, or they have a friend group, but maybe it's one that they're not really connected to and they're not deeply rooted in, so they don't feel like they can be themselves. So I'm wondering if that's a part of it, just kind of something that could be contributing to that discrepancy.
That's a really good point. The relational component for girls in particular, not that boys aren't, but the girls in particular really crave that connection. And when you don't know if you trust somebody, like, do they like me? Do they not like me? What do they think of me? I'm afraid of being rejected, so they don't want to put themselves out there. Have you seen that as a big struggle for teens?
Definitely. And, and one of the big issues I think that contributes to that is with what we see on social media, with the filter upon filter that's used, where people are, just filtering themselves so much where they look like an avatar version of themselves, or, they're only sharing their highlight reel and they're only showing like the good moments. And then a lot of the teens that I work with, I'll talk to them about how, you're not putting that picture of yourself up with the double chin and the huge pimple on your cheek. Your friends aren't doing that either. So you've got to keep that in mind. Like, they're not showing the realistic kinds of versions of themselves, just like you're not. So you can't trust what you're seeing online. But it's so hard when you're just scrolling constantly, and especially with TikTok, where they are on TikTok for hours and just constantly scrolling. You're not keeping that in mind. These are filtered images. These are highlight reels. And then you start to really lose kind of a connection, like a real world connection with other people, or even just the ability to feel good about yourself, because it looks like everybody else is better looking than me. Everybody else is having more fun. Everyone else is smarter than me, and you feel like you're not enough no matter what.
Yeah, that shame of not enough. And like there's something wrong with you. You're defective. You're not thin enough. You're not smart enough. You're not pretty enough. You're not successful enough. You're not liked enough. You're not popular enough. That seems to plague teens with that social media comparison.
Definitely. That's a huge part. And I know teens today, I don't want to discredit them by saying that they're not aware of the filters or they're not aware of the highlight reels, because they are. And they will even call out posts where they'll, call people thirsty, or like they're impression hunters. Like, they are aware when people appear too desperate. But at the same time, they contribute to that too, where they contribute by the certain celebrities that they're following, or following like the popular kids at school, and then being so concerned with what are the popular kids doing? And oh my gosh, they're going to parties, or they're doing so much more than me. And they recognize it, but only to a certain level. And then they also kind of fall into the whole cycle of it and contribute to it as well.
So when you are working with teens, how do you help them? Because we know brain development, brains aren't fully developed, that executive prefrontal cortex. That's like the rational brain, CEO of the brain till we're 25. How do you work with teens to recognize the comparison of reality versus non-reality, or truth versus fiction?
It's a process, it's helping them become aware of, first of all, the types of things that they're posting themselves, and asking them why they're posting those things. And so that they think of, because I looked really thin, or my skin looked really good that day, or made it look like I'm really social and constantly hanging out with friends, helping them recognize those things that they do themselves. So then they can start to apply those to the images that they're seeing online, that that's probably what other people are doing. That's one thing that can help. Also, having them take breaks from scrolling so they can stop and check in. One of the things that I do in my therapy boot camp is I have them do like a little bit of a cleanse, like a social media cleanse, where you're looking at it with like a critical eye. You're looking at your feed and checking in with yourself about how certain things make you feel, and certain posts and certain people that you're following. And maybe you need to unfollow certain accounts, or maybe it's your cousin and you're not comfortable unfollowing her, but maybe you can mute her for a while. And so she's just not popping up for the next 30 days. And then you can kind of check in and see how you feel, if you notice a difference in how you feel when you're going through. I even have some teens where I have them create a whole separate account, where it's just an account that's dedicated to following things that inspire and motivate. So when they go on that account and they're scrolling that versus their personal one, what do they notice in terms of how they feel as they're going through their social media? So it's really about helping them build that awareness. But with teens, you have to be so careful, because you can't tell them what to do. They need to figure it out themselves. So it's trying to ask the right questions to get them thinking differently. And then eventually you'll start to see them make these little baby step shifts and changes.
That's really helpful. Parents always want to go, well, what kind of questions should I ask? This is what parents want to know. Do you have questions that you really encourage parents to ask their teen?
Yeah. So just things like when, if they've been on their phone for a little while, the parent can ask something like, I see that you've been on your phone for the last 2 hours. Like, how are you feeling? How's your mood? Or how does your body feel? And so just a real general check-in. It's not a parent telling them, hey, you've been on your phone for 2 hours. You need to go take a walk outside. But instead, kind of like checking in, like, how do you feel? Do you feel any different? Or on a day, like I'll have some families where they'll do a screen-free day. So the whole family will do, shutting off screens for, let's say, a Sunday afternoon or something. And then checking in with the teen at the end of that. Like, so how was it for you today? How did you feel? Did you feel like you were missing out on things? Did you feel more connected to your family? Did you feel like you weren't so distracted? So just asking those kinds of check-in questions to get them thinking. And they might not give you the answers you want. They might tell you, after scrolling on TikTok for 2 hours, I feel great. I'm happy. I'm so excited. And then the parent could just be like, okay, great. And just kind of leave it alone. But doing that enough, you'll start to see the teen will share a little bit more honest feedback. And then you can use the feedback that they're giving to help them develop a different plan on how to approach social media.
It's such an interesting conversation because I have a 16-year-old, she just turned 16, daughter, and then a 14-year-old. The 16-year-old has not had any social media. She came to me and she's like, can I have Instagram? So we talked about feelings that can come up, the shame it can create, and how that can make her feel. And then after she had it for one day, she came to me and said, I want to delete my account. And I said, really? What's going on? So she wants to get off social media. She says that she's comparing herself to other people and she's feeling so much shame. We've taught the word shame in our home since birth practically. So she was able to name that and say, I want to get off this social media. So we did. She got off and I was so proud of her for recognizing how that made her feel and the empowerment to say, this isn't going to be healthy for me.
You know what? That is incredible. And I think that speaks so much to the type of non-judgmental atmosphere you must have at home. Because I think a lot of times teens are scared to say something like that to parents because they might be met with, and I told you so, or something kind of judgy and critical. And that speaks volumes to the type of kind of open, non-judgmental atmosphere that she could come and share something like that.
Well, that is very kind. I definitely took my deep breaths before I responded. I said, I'm so proud of you for noticing how your body felt and how you felt emotionally, and that it was creating a lot of shame. And how I noticed it, I go, did something happen at school? What's going on? That attunement piece, I could tell something was off. And what was off, she was feeling so much of that not good enough. It took her, 15 minutes to say, it's really the social media, because she didn't want to hear, I told you so. And I knew if I went, well, this is why, because I've had to manage that response. If I start with this is why, that's my I told you so, and it lands a shame. So I was like, okay, take a deep breath. When you are working with teens right now and anxiety is sky high, would you say it's at an all-time high, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I know from the Surgeon General report where they talk about how it's doubled during the pandemic, but we even know that prior to the pandemic, anxiety and depression were increasing among teens and tweens. So it's not that it's new that it's increasing or only the pandemic. I mean, if you think about all of the things that kind of contribute to anxiety in teens, when you think of real world events like climate change, social injustices, income inequality, they get that information. I'm 45. And when I was growing up, I was only aware of what was on the nightly news. And that's if my parents had it on in the background. It's not like I was watching it. Where now they are getting that information fed to them through not even just if they're on Twitter, but even on Instagram, where someone they follow might share something going on. So they are way more connected to what's going on in the world. And that has a really big impact too. And I'm sure that contributes to anxiety. I think also that this generation is more aware of mental health issues because we've been getting better and better in our culture of talking about mental health issues and trying to educate people about it, trying to destigmatize it a bit so that they are feeling more comfortable talking about anxiety or saying I'm anxious or being able to put a finger on what's going on. Whereas when I was a kid and I was anxious, I didn't know it was anxiety. I didn't know I didn't know what that word meant. They now know what that word means. So they have the emotional vocabulary that previous generations didn't have.
How important when we're working with anxiety, depression in teens, is it the parent relationship with the teen? How important in your work do you see that?
It's probably one of the biggest protective factors. There's other protective factors. So if that relationship is really poor, I don't want to stress parents out because I know that there are parents out there who are doing the absolute best they can and they still don't have a good relationship. And I don't want them to think, oh my gosh, then it's lights out. There's nothing I can do. There's no hope, because there are a lot of protective factors in place for mental health. The parent-teen relationship is one of those protective factors, but it is an important piece. Having a home environment where teens feel safe is really important, and also where they feel safe to be themselves, where they're not going to be made to feel embarrassed because, maybe the kind of music they like, or maybe they're starting to question their gender identity or their sexual identity, where they're not going to be shamed or made to feel awful for those kinds of things. So when there's a relationship between a parent and teen that's open and there's some trust there, even if they don't agree, but the teen knows I can tell my mom or dad pretty much anything, and I know they're not going to disown me. I know that they're going to kind of talk me through it, or they're not going to make me feel awful. That definitely helps tremendously.
How do you help parents that have had this hybrid schedule with their kids? The kids are frustrated, the parents are frustrated. How do you help the family system to move through this?
Yeah, one of the best things for mental health is to have a pretty consistent routine. And when things shift and change suddenly, as has been happening over the past couple of years, that isn't helpful for mental health, but especially like for kids who are prone to anxiety or are prone to emotional dysregulation, that can be a little more challenging even for them. So anything that parents can do to look ahead at schedules and put it on the family board or put it on the fridge or in the kids' room so they know exactly what to expect for the week. Or I know, what you were just telling me off when we weren't recording, how things kind of shifted very quickly. This wasn't a pre-planned thing. And so then you have to be able to just adjust on the fly when the school suddenly makes a shift and change, and to maybe even expect that, this is probably going to be a tough day, because think about even adults, we don't like it at work when stuff gets shifted. If we're at work and all of a sudden a supervisor comes in and throws a meeting on our calendar for the day, thinking of as an adult, how much that impacts us, that can give us some empathy for what teens are going through, because adults don't like it either. This isn't just like a teen, just as humans, we all like routines. We like consistency. We like to know what's happening. So anything that we can do to kind of know ahead of time what's happening, but then when things shift and change on us at the last minute, maybe even plan in some extra breaks during the day, or be really flexible. Like, okay, so there's a really good chance today that we're probably not gonna, finish everything. And I'm just going to be okay with that. As a parent, I'm going to let down my need for my kid to get all of their schoolwork done, because maybe they're just going to have some missing assignments this week. And I'm going to be okay with that. And I'm going to help my kid be okay with that too, because their mental health is more important. And then if there is the opportunity to plan a mental health day, like down the road, maybe even to look ahead and say, okay, since this week, everything kind of went down the drain, the school changed things on us. Let's look at next week and see where maybe there's a day where we can take the day off, and you can have a day where we're going to go for a walk, or we're going to go get a manicure, or something to just kind of take a break from it all.
Yeah, it's interesting as we look at the ebbs and flows of just life, and flexibility is so essential to coping with those ups and downs. And teens, like you said, and kids thrive on structure and consistency. And here we are. It's kind of a roller coaster ride. We don't know what's going to happen one minute to the next. And that's why I love therapy for kids, or programs for kids that help them develop the ability to self-soothe, the ability to learn how to self-regulate and deal with the shame and the fear of rejection and abandonment and all those things, how they learn how to take care of those emotional roller coaster rides that they can get on, and parents as well. So what are some of the tools that you teach to help parents and teens learn how to self-soothe and self-regulate?
As far as the tools go, one thing is, this isn't even necessarily a tool, but just thinking of on a daily basis, we have to have good mental health habits in place on a daily basis. So thinking of what are some good mental health habits that maybe I want to get into place, or maybe I already have them in place, but I need to highlight them as habits that I've created that are really good for helping me manage stress and anxiety and depression, and highlight those things for teens so that they see, oh, so mom does yoga, not because she's worried about weight. Mom's doing yoga because it really helps her with stress. So we want to, first of all, just have some really good mental health habits. And if parents don't have those in place, maybe working on developing some and getting those in place. And so that might be, turning off devices by a certain time every night, because what we know, what pediatricians say is that kids want to be off devices and screens about 90 minutes before bedtime. So parents might even want to just have like a household rule of getting off devices by a certain time. But parents also need to have good mental health habits in terms of how they talk to themselves and how they talk about other people, because those things really impact our mental health. If I'm talking, if I'm constantly saying things like, if I make a mistake and I'm talking about how dumb I am, or, oh my God, I screwed things up again. Like, would I want my kid talking to herself like that? No. So I shouldn't be talking about myself like that. And so parents might have to work on their own self-talk. They might have to work on how they talk about other people, especially around their kids. So those are just getting some really good mental health habits in place. And then once we have those in place, then we can start to add some really good tools and some things that we can do when our stress or anxiety is starting to get really high. We know one of the best things for our mental health is physical activity. It doesn't matter what it is, if it's dancing, if it's bike riding, running, yoga, whatever, but physical activity, some form of movement is one of the best things that we can do specifically for anxiety and depression. So if parents can add that as a tool, and then again, highlight it to say, I'm so stressed out about my presentation I have to do at work tomorrow. So I'm going for a bike ride. Like, you guys, I'm turning off my phone, I'm going for a ride. And then when they come back to even talk about, oh my God, that I feel so much better about my presentation tomorrow. Like, I'm not as nervous now. And so they're kind of highlighting how that tool was helpful for them. So when their teen needs something like that, they're able to say, hey, you know how I go for bike rides? Like, it sounds like we need to find something like that for you and see if that works. So physical activity is a really important tool. The deep breathing, kind of like how before we started the podcast, you had us take a couple of just relaxing breaths. It is amazing what a couple of good deep breaths does to our central nervous system. It really does create a physiological response. And so if parents get in the habit of, if their stress or anxiety is high, maybe their kid is really, really upset. And so if the parent makes a point of just doing like a nice slow deep breath first before responding, they're modeling a really great tool, and they're teaching them how to kind of slow themselves down. So doing some deep breathing is really great. And then another one of my favorite tools is to have a mantra, something that we can repeat over and over to ourselves to help calm ourselves down. It could be something like, it's not the end of the world, or I can do hard things, but just something that we can repeat during really tough times that's going to help just regulate and calm ourselves down a bit.
It is life-changing. And I don't always do it well. The main thing that I notice in my own physiology is when one of my teens, you just got to witness it. Melody's like, I'm like, can you please hold? I've got a dysregulated teen downstairs trying to work on e-learning, and she's screaming at her computer. I know adults do that too. And so I could feel my nervous system, because I'm like, I don't want to waste Melanie's time. Here we are on the podcast. She's so gracious enough to come on. I could just feel myself going, okay, breathe through it, stay regulated, because we tend to match. We can match. So if they're flipped, we're flipped. That all goes, we know where, south pretty quickly. And it's hard to do. I mean, that's why I say it's practice, like you saying, doing it daily. So then when you can feel your teen getting dysregulated or your kid, you can go, I know what to do, breathe. I know what to do. I can handle this. I can handle this. Instead of going, you want it to stop. Like that's the first thing. You just want it to stop. You want them to stop. And then I'm not in control. I'm dysregulated. We're all flipping our lids.
Right. And, and because we are, as humans, we're social creatures. So a lot of times what happens is we will match other people's breathing without even realizing that we're doing it. So if the teen is really anxious and their breathing is really rapid, we might also start breathing rapidly and we don't even know that we're doing it. But then that rapid breathing, it starts to trigger that whole physiological response inside of our nervous system, which is now going to make us feel more anxious. So if we make it a practice where immediately we slow down our breathing, we are interrupting that loop. So we're not going to get as anxious. We're not going to get pulled into their anxiety, first of all. But then we might also help to calm them down because now their breathing is more likely to fall in line and start to match us. And so now they might start breathing more slowly, even if they don't intend to.
Exactly. And I've watched it happen. The more regulated I am, the more regulated they eventually become. It may take a while. And if you can continue just to focus, put your oxygen mask on first, that whole airplane metaphor, breathe through that. It really does work. It's the pause. It's teaching people to get to the pause. For the teen also, if the parent can pause first, like you said, we're modeling what that looks like because with anxiety, we tend to go super fast. And so to disrupt the anxiety, we want to slow things down because the anxiety wants to speed it up, right? In the nervous system.
And we are trying to not get pulled in because it is so easy to get pulled into someone else's anxiety or someone else's sense of panic. So we have to be able to do that pause and calm ourselves down so we're not getting pulled in. But also it helps too because it creates a little bit of a boundary between us and the teen. So we're not taking on their feelings as our own. And now we can be a little bit more of an observer of what's happening. And we're seeing things a little bit more from the Wiseman space. That's a big part of DBT, where they teach an emotional mind, a rational mind, and then the intersection between those two is the wise mind. And that's typically where we want to be. We don't want to only be in the emotional mind. We don't only want to be in the rational mind. We want to be in that little intersection. So that's kind of what that helps us do, where we can still have empathy. We're not being really cold and aloof to them or what they're going through. But at the same time, we can see things from more of an observer perspective. And we might be able to help, either give them space or listen, see if they're ready to go into problem solving mode, or if they need help coming up with a coping tool to help themselves calm down.
I think one of the greatest things I've seen over the last 3 years is the pandemic. It's invited us into deeper work of our own. So as a parent and a human on this planet, to do our own healing work with teens right now is one of the greatest gifts you can offer. So I see a lot of parents want to bring their teen in, which is great to have a therapist. And I think do that. And I think that's helpful. I also think parents that are willing to do some of their own inner child work, or if they're got some trauma, or they just feel so dysregulated and so triggered by their child. The child isn't triggering them. The trigger's already there. Mm-hmm. I feel like the whole system, the generational transmission of all these unconscious ways we've parented or been parented or conditioned is a way to disrupt it. Like that parent saying, you know what? I'm going to also sign up and do my own work. I'm going to also take this class. I'm going to also listen to this podcast, read this book, do this group program. I feel like that is really the secret sauce in a lot of ways. The teens have their support and the parents do too.
Yeah. And it's so helpful because then the teen sees that their parent is willing to grow and evolve. Because when they see that their parent, first of all, can admit that there's an issue or, can admit that, hey, you know what, I've got anxiety too, or I don't handle my own stress well. I know that I blow up way too easily. Now the teen is getting to see their parent model something that the parent wants the kid to do. The parent wants the kid to take accountability, to take responsibility. Now here is the parent modeling that. And then on top of that, the parent isn't saying, by sending only the teen to therapy and I'm saying that you're the issue, you're the problem, but I'm going to, and I'm getting my own help. I'm recognizing that this is a systemic issue, or this is something like we all need help. We all need support, and there's no problem like with getting support. I'm not embarrassed. I'm not ashamed to get support too. Teens, I cannot even tell you, I'm sure you're well aware, but parents out there listening, teens are paying so much attention to what they are doing, and they notice. So if a parent isn't taking care of themselves, if they are hypocritical in terms of what they're telling their kid to, you need to work on this and you need to control your temper, but they're screaming it at them. Teens, they might sit there in the moment and just kind of be like, okay, mom. But then they come to therapy and they're just like, oh my gosh, my mom needs to be seeing someone. Yes. They're paying attention to all of that.
They tell the truth. They'll tell everything. And what I tell my children, here's the key. What you're saying is so powerful. There's a term called differentiation for those that are listening. I've done an episode on it where we can have our own thoughts, feelings, opinions, emotions that are not exactly the same as the family system. And the parents or the family system, the caregivers can tolerate it. Their window of tolerance goes, oh, that's okay. That's healthy. I'm not threatened by that. And that is the key work, is the parent can hear that feedback to say, my kids will tell me, because I've allowed them to tell me the truth. And they'll say, Mom, you just said, calm yourself down, but you're all worked up. And it's like, okay, yes, thank you for that feedback. You're exactly right. Radical ownership. Like, yeah, thank you. Like, I can tolerate it. It doesn't mean my feelings aren't going to be hurt. They're not trying to hurt my feelings. They're trying to help wake me. Like, they're trying to give me truths of things I need to hear to grow. Now, they're not responsible for helping me grow. That's not their job. That's my job. So that is like, they're able to differentiate and have their own thoughts, feelings, and opinions. And it's not threatening to you. It actually creates more connection. I feel like that creates less anxiety for kids, that they're not like hiding, they're not masking, placating, trying to please, all these defense mechanisms that we've learned to survive. They can actually speak truth with love and grace.
And absolutely. And that type of, if their truth is different than a parent's, it doesn't have to mean that the relationship isn't healthy. And actually, that's a sign of a very healthy relationship when you can have very different opinions and thoughts and feelings on things, and yet you can still support each other. And when parents take that as a threat, then, like you said, all they're doing is causing all of these other defense mechanisms to come into place. And then the teens grow up to be adults who now have to unlearn all of that stuff.
Oh my gosh, this is such a good conversation, because I feel like that's the crux. If we can create an environment where we can handle all the emotions now in a respectful way, they're going to get dysregulated. That's part of the journey. I get dysregulated. I mean, this is part of my work, right? We all soothe myself. And when we can say, you know what, I really do want to know the truth. I'm not just saying it. I really do want to know the truth of how you feel. That takes a secure self.
100%. And for parents who don't quite feel like they're ready to do that, one thing that I've had a lot of parents do with a lot of success is they keep a journal that is just between them and their teen. So whichever parent is going to keep the journal, and sometimes mom will have her own separate one with the teen and dad will have their own separate one, and everyone's in agreement. No one else is looking at this journal. So let's say mom and the teen have their own special journal where they're writing back and forth to each other in it. And sometimes that can be a really good way to start this, because it gives you time to kind of digest what they're saying and to work through any feelings that pop up. So if you notice that you feel really tense, you read something that your teen's written and you instantly just tense up and you don't know how to handle it, it's like, okay, good thing this is through a journal, because I have time to kind of work on this, to cope with it a little bit, to calm myself down, to figure out how I can respond from that wise mind space. And so then I can continue to build this really great, healthy, honest relationship with them.
I love it. Do you find that they want to text rather than write in a journal? Some kids love journaling and some kids don't.
Yeah, I have had, it's funny because I constantly suggest journaling and they're like, can we do this in a group text instead? And it's so absolutely, if a group text works better, or just a text between just one parent and the teen, if that works better, because, it's more instant. The only problem with the texting is that it doesn't give you quite the same amount of time to digest, because people expect with texting, they expect that immediate response. And if, let's say your kid tells you something that like, I can't sit on this too long. Maybe they're telling me they're coming out to me. I can't sit on this too long. I need to say something back, but maybe the parent feels really dysregulated. So that's the only issue with the texting part. It doesn't give you that time to regulate. Whereas with the journal, they're leaving it with you before they go to school. They know they're not getting it back until night. That gives you a little more time to process.
I agree. I agree totally. Is there anything else that you would offer that we didn't cover on just the state of teens now and how to help them, how to hold space, how to be present with their pain or their fears or their shame that we didn't cover?
I guess one thing that comes to mind is just helping them figure out what they have control over and what they don't have control over. So when we think about anxiety or mental health in general, when we think of current events, and it can be really overwhelming. Let's just take wildfires, for example, where maybe a kid on the East Coast is reading about a wildfire on the West Coast. That's obviously something out of their control, but it's having a huge impact on them to teach them, okay, what part of this do we have control over? And what choices can we make that will help us feel empowered so that maybe we're doing something to help the environment. Maybe we're going to ride our bike to school instead of getting a ride every day or once a couple days a week, something so they feel empowered. But then the things that they have absolutely no control over, like watching the news of the wildfires, they have no control over that. So now we have to figure out a way to let that go. And I know that can be really hard for teens and for adults too, but we have to find ways to let that go. And so that might be through teaching meditation, teaching them some yoga that's for relaxation. It might be doing like a news fast in the house or limiting time on devices so we're not doom scrolling, but helping with that distinction between what you have control over, what you don't have control over, and then being able to problem solve for those certain parts and let go of the others.
That's helpful. And then that kind of ties into hyperfixation, where teens kind of hyperfixate on something. Do you see a lot of that as well?
Yeah, it depends. You know, the kids with ADHD, definitely that tends to be a little bit more of an issue. I feel like with so many teens, they're just bombarded with so much that sometimes I almost see the opposite because they can't stay on one thing for long. It's like Dave Chappelle said it best in one of his stand-up skits when he said how teens today, it's like experiencing 9/11 every day, where they see one, news event that's like really traumatic, but don't worry, a few hours later, there's going to be another one. They're just constantly experiencing that. So then they end up jumping from one crisis to another.
Yeah. It's really something. I mean, because it's opened up, like you said, we're the same age, fairly close in age. And our parents, we just had the news on. I mean, and that was already, I remember being in the background and some of those things were traumatic. So here we are trying to help them be able to deal with hard things. That's what we're trying to do. Equip them, help them name their emotions, process them, acknowledge them, offer empathy, allow a space for truth telling. Right. I just feel like that is the key. Offer a space. Now, is it going to be pretty all the time? No, just like today when mine was having a meltdown over the computer. And she has the tools, just like I have the tools. And sometimes my lid gets flipped and I'm not accessing the tools. But
yeah. And you just made me think of something else, that a lot of times these things don't have to happen at these like pretty little moments of around the dinner table or, at a yoga retreat. These moments, like these opportunities come up, in car rides or on a day home from school to do e-learning. Like they pop up constantly, but they're not going to necessarily be at this structured time. So it's kind of like, okay, here's an opportunity. Here's a chance for me to give them space and to help them process, like you said, but also to help them figure out how to cope with this.
So glad you said that, because people are like, well, it's not a good time. I'm like, there's micro moments of time where if you're paying attention and you can stay regulated, because they get afraid they're going to trigger their teen or they're going to upset their teen, and then it holds them back from having some of these really powerful conversations.
Right. And teens they are aware of what's going on. They are aware of what's going on at home and in the world, a lot more so than I think a lot of adults give them credit for. So parents usually aren't protecting them. And instead, when they don't bring up certain things, all they're doing is teaching them that that's a topic that's off limits.
Yes. And then they start to doubt themselves. Like if we name it and you're like, yeah, what you saw in the house, so-and-so has an issue or whatever it is, they go, oh, I knew it. They begin to trust themselves. They develop self-trust. That they weren't just, they know it, but then they can get talked out of it. Or if it's ignored or not named or hidden, even though it's still there, it becomes this almost like a mind game. Like, is my reality true? Is my reality not true? I know it is, but they're saying it's not, or they're just not acknowledging it.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yes. That's like a whole other episode on, with some of the gaslighting that goes on in homes that, definitely teens are aware and they need to build that skill of trusting themselves, and parents can help by normalizing certain things, but also naming things, not being ashamed of something, if there's like a marital conflict or issue, to be honest about it, but from a developmentally appropriate way. You don't want your teen to become your confidant or your friend, but just something that, you know what, Dad and I are having some issues, but we're working with a marriage therapist and we're working on this. But sometimes you might see us get really frustrated with one another, but that's why we're in therapy together, as opposed to trying to hide it behind a closed door.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I love this conversation. It was a first where I'm like, and I'm having a teen have a meltdown in the middle of having the teen specialist, the teen expert here on the podcast. So powerful. I think it was just exactly how it was meant to go. So where can people find you? I know you have some exciting things I mentioned about the beginning, but where can they find you in your work?
Yeah. So, well, if you're on social, people can follow me at Dr. Melanie McNally. I have a website, which is destinationu.net. And if you go to the website too, you'll see that I have some self-guided programs, one of which is called Therapy Bootcamp. And that's one that you had mentioned earlier, where it starts April 4th. That's my next cohort. But Therapy Bootcamp, I'm really excited about it. It's an 8-week app-based program for tweens and teens where they learn. I kind of walk them through almost what I do for the first 8 weeks of therapy with my clients, where week 1 is about building self-awareness. Another week is all about learning how to trust your body and identify signs and symptoms of anxiety in your body, knowing when they're warning signs, knowing when you need to ignore them. Another week is all about coping tools for really hard feelings. There's a week that's about interpersonal skills. So each week has a different topic, and then they need about 15 to 30 minutes a day. They get an exercise or an activity based on that week's topic. And throughout the entire boot camp, we can chat. So there's an ability to chat, not just with me, but with other boot campers.
That's exciting. I can tell you're excited about it.
I'm so excited. I'm getting such great feedback from I just launched it this year. So my first cohort I'm getting such great feedback from them, from the parents. My next, cohort that starts April 4th, I already have, a wait list where I'm going to kind of divide them up by age. So I'm going to do the tweens are going to have their own cohort, the teens. But I'm really excited because I just feel like it's such a great, accessible way for teens and tweens to get mental health support. And it's on their phone, which they already are on constantly anyways. But now they're on it for something that's going to promote good mental health.
This sounds fantastic. So I'm excited for you. Yes, go check it out. Go check out the program, Melanie's work, and all the important, impactful, transformational things you're doing. Thank you so much. I had loved our time together and look forward to another conversation at some point.
Yes, thank you so much. I loved our conversation too. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so, so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, KRISTEN, DBoice, BOICE.com. Thanks and have a great day.